One of the emerging issues in horticulture is particle and vapor drift of 2,4-D and dicamba, and that's in part because there have been newly released seed traits in corn and soybean that have allowed increased application of those two chemicals. Now, these two chemicals have been applied in backyard landscapes for decades. They're commonly found in broadleaf weed killers for things like dandelion and other problematic turfgrass weeds. And we're only starting to see them more now because of their broad application across the agricultural landscape. And so what we aim to do in this project is to look at some of the symptoms and injury that are typical of drift of these two chemicals, 2,4-D and dicamba, in part so that we can become better at identifying what those injury symptoms look like. And also we want to take those injury symptoms and relate that to potential yield loss in vegetable crops. So for example, if you start to see injury symptoms typical of dicamba, can you expect that you're going to lose a significant amount of yield and maybe you should replant that crop? Or do you ride it out, let the plant recover, and still get a harvestable crop off of that?
Here I'm going to show you guys some of the typical symptoms from dicamba injury on pumpkins. Because dicamba and 2,4-D, they are growth regulator, so they typically will affect the new growth of plant. So if you look at the new growth, you can see first you can see some cupping symptoms. That's very typical. Later you can see some, we call that leaf crinkling. You can see those bumps on the leaves. That is very common on broadleaf, like vine. They typically have the symptoms. Later you can see this is our 25% of the dicamba rate we spray on our flowering stage pumpkins. Some of the symptoms including the leaf stem and leaf patio apenacity. They kind of show something like the plant just grow horizontally. You can also see some leaf chlorosis on our leaf. That's very typical dicamba injury. For my research, I'm testing two different herbicides, dicamba and 2,4-D. As you can see, this plot is dicamba plot. We also want to take yield data to match with our rate to kind of predict how many yield loss you're gonna expect. This is the plot that we spray with 25% dicamba on flowering stage. We can see a lot of flowering that is lost from herbicide, and we can see there's not so many plants in this plot. There might be one pumpkins per plant, so we typically have 5. But if you compare to our control plot, we have about 2 per plant, so we have at least 10 to 12 pumpkins. So there's a huge yield reduction. Even some of this is the one we spray at flowering stage, and we also have a plot that we spray 25% when it's at vegetative stage. You can see the symptoms is already recovered because it's 7 weeks after we apply, but you can still, if you look down beneath, you can see there's not so many fruit there as well.
So now that you know what the typical symptoms of plant growth regulators like 2,4-D and dicamba look like, hopefully you can better identify what that herbicide drift looks like so that you can make decisions about whether or not to replant a vegetable in your backyard or whether or not you want to go ahead and harvest that, and also maybe work with your neighbors to identify when to avoid and how to avoid some of that drift into your backyard.